Welcome to the Crime Redefined podcast, produced by Zero Cliff Media. Coming to you from the US Bank Tower, high above downtown Los Angeles. In our podcast, we drill deep into forensics and criminal investigation from the viewpoint of the defense, as well as explore the intersection of the media and the justice system.
Hello, I'm Dion Mitchell here with Mehul and Anjaria. On today's episode of Crime Redefined, we have the distinct honor of interviewing a special guest who has an innovative product that vastly improves the amount of DNA collected from forensic evidence.
Since 2008, Jared Bradley has been the president of M-Vac Systems. His company successfully pivoted from the food safety market into the realm of forensic science. The M-Vac system has helped develop DNA profiles in hundreds of cases in which traditional DNA sampling methods have failed. Jared calls upon his military and sales experience to help investigators solve more cases with this very cool product.
The phrase Crumbs of Evidence, the title of this episode, really describes what the M-Vac is capable of recovering in cases with the highest stakes. The media is fully aware of what the M-Vac can do and loves to highlight Jared's product and its work in solving cases and exonerating the innocent.
I first spoke with Jared around 2012, and I've been closely following the progress he's making in forensics. I finally had the pleasure of meeting him in person at a presentation he made to a local Innocence Project chapter last year. And of course, recently, we both worked with him in developing a concept for a forensic show for TV based on the M-Vac.
That's right. That was really a learning experience, at least for me. So, Mehul, let's not make our listeners wait any longer. Enjoy the interview.
Jared, thank you for joining us on Crime Redefined today. Tell us a little bit about the history of M-Vac Systems Incorporated and some of the original work your father did in establishing the company.
Well, sure. Hey, thanks for having me on. And I really appreciate the chance to talk about the M-Vac. I'm always willing to go anywhere and talk to anybody about it.
We look forward to it.
Yeah. My dad first got the idea for the M-Vac around 1996, somewhere around there. It wasn't too long after the E. coli outbreak that you guys experienced, partly in California, but all along the West Coast. The Jack in the Box E. coli outbreak, you guys remember that? Killed like 6 kids and made a bunch of people sick.
Right.
So my dad grew up on a ranch in Idaho. And so any kind of beef contamination just really bothered him. And so he started analyzing the problem and realized that they have all this whiz-bang equipment, PCR devices and things for the detection. But on the front end, they were covering like a half of a side of beef with a little 1x4 inch swab, not really a swab, but like a little sponge.
That's kind of scary.
And yeah. So we don't want to talk too much about the food industry because, you'll never eat it. You'll never eat again. So once he realized that the primary weakness in the entire solution was on the front end, then he started thinking about, if you want to have a better sample, what do? You need to get down into the nooks and crannies where those just minute, possibly even just one E. coli cell would be hiding. And so if you want to do that, it's the same principle as if you want to get a stain up off your couch or off of the carpet, you don't use a hand broom. You get nasty with the thing and you get in there with a carpet cleaner and the handheld attachment that you would use like on the stairs where it sprays and vacuums at the same time, but you can manipulate it pretty easily with just one hand. That was what his goal was. And so that's when he came up with the concept of the M-Vac.
Very interesting. So then how did you get the idea to apply the M-Vac to forensic DNA collection?
Well, a couple things. Forensics had always been on my dad's mind. In fact, years before I ever got involved, he had actually, I was a pharmaceutical rep down in San Diego, and he had come down to San Diego, and I had hooked him up with a friend of mine that was in the FBI, and he introduced him to like the DNA expert of that office down there, and they'd had a kind of a preliminary conversation that had to be, I don't know, 15 years ago, but early 2000s type thing. And, but it was never really his focus.
Yeah.
But he always kind of knew that the application was out there, just like collecting biowarfare, like anthrax and things like that. He always had the idea that would be a possibility, but his first love was food safety, especially the beef industry. And so when we launched this thing in 2007 into the food industry, trying to get them to use it, it was just like banging our heads against a brick wall.
Is that right?
Yeah. They, in fact, the final straw was we were in a big beef plant in Kansas, and we're talking to the plant manager and the quality manager, and the quality manager was all about it because their responsibilities is to make sure that the product is safe, and the plant manager who has both responsibilities of not only making sure that things are safe, but also the production schedule. So we said, look, use this system out in your plant. You'll be able to find more contamination.
Okay. So then what year did the M-Vac then become available to the forensic DNA community?
Well, it's always been available since 2007, but none of them really knew about it. I think it was around 2009. We decided to. I had run into that college buddy again, and again was describing, as an FBI agent, he saw the system and said, "Man, it would have been awesome on some of my crime scenes." So at that junction, we took it to Sorensen Forensics, which is a private crime lab in Salt Lake City, and we said, hey, test this thing for us and see if it'll work in a forensics application. And so 2009, 2010 is when it was first tested. And they came back and they were saying, we've never seen recoveries like this. So, yeah, was
that the aha moment?
Well, it was certainly we got to start looking into this moment. And in fact, one of the Sorensen people actually said, "This thing is so good, you should be doing backflips off this table." And so,
I'd say that's an aha moment.
Yeah,
yeah, you would think, but it still took us a couple of years till it really sunk in. But once we really knew that the food industry just wasn't going to do anything with it.
Can I ask you a question about that real quick, Jared? Is
sure.
that something that they did not want to know? Like what they didn't find wouldn't hurt them situation? You'd think that you'd want to know if there was bacteria or anything else. Is this just clearly the resistance they just did not want to know?
Yeah, there's a standard that they have to meet, and they don't want to surpass that. And it's ignorance is bliss kind of thing. And it's, Now, granted, it's so hard to, you've got a 100,000 square foot plant, and you're looking for one or two cells.
Right.
And, so you can literally test yourself out of business. But at the same time, doing it at least statistically significant testing is, you would think, would be more important. But it's, it's just one of those times when, we finally realized, man, it's just, they're just not going to do it unless the USDA just absolutely puts them in a headlock. And that's kind of when, right around the end of 2011, we were like, you know what, if we don't find a good market where it's a win-win situation, we can provide this highly aggressive system that's going to get down there and get even the minute amounts of whatever minuscule particle they're looking for. But also the customer wants that.
Sure.
And that's really when we ran into just the right people at the right time. And they said, look, you should start marketing this to the crime labs and law enforcement agencies. And so we pivoted in 2012 and really haven't looked anywhere since.
Okay, so tell us a little bit then how and why the M-Vac works in the forensic setting.
Well, in forensics is much like, it doesn't matter if it's a skin cell, or an E. coli cell. The physics of picking that up off of a surface is the exact same.
Right.
And so the M-Vac, it works just like I said, just like a carpet cleaner. So it sprays the solution down and vacuums at the same time. And so it creates a little mini hurricane down there on the surface of the whatever surface they're trying to collect from. And some cells, like semen, for example, is going to get into fibers of like panties, for example, and so it kind of needs to be wet, and so it'll release from that surface. But even a blood stain that's on a pair of pants, a pair of Levi's, for example, is going to be kind of crusted in there, and so by applying the solution at the same time as the vacuum pressure, it enables a lot more of that DNA material to be collected compared to just the scrubbing of the swab. So that's probably the primary reason that it works so well.
So I want to fast forward a little bit to a milestone that you hit recently with this product. And I know that you were at the Southern Association of Forensic Scientists meeting. And I saw on YouTube you had posted a presentation by somebody from the FBI. What was the significance of that presentation, and what were the conclusions of their research? Well,
in the forensics industry, as anybody can imagine, when the FBI actually looks at your product, and of course they're not going to give a full endorsement, but anything short of saying, yeah, this product is just substandard, don't ever use it, is pretty much a thumbs up. And so having the premier law enforcement agency in the world look at your product and then come out, and their data basically, it depended on the surface, but it was between 5 and 47 times better than a swab.
That number, 5 to 47 times, is that consistent with what other research projects and validations have shown?
Oh, sure. Yeah, it depends on what the surface is. For example, Philadelphia Crime Lab, they tested like a suspended saliva on it was almost like a towel, kind of a thin towel substrate, and they collected 180 times more.
Wow.
And so it varies, but when you're talking down in the touch DNA scenarios where they're just looking for skin cells, or maybe somebody grabbed your sleeve or something like that, then it might be down in the 3, 5, 8x range. And so it's a lot lower, but most of that is just because the amount of DNA that's deposited is so much lower. But yeah, I'd say 5 to 47 is pretty average. That's right in the middle of what we'd expect, especially based on what they were doing. So yeah, those are good results, but we're certainly excited about it because now that they've released that data, what crime lab in the world is going to say, oh, we don't think this thing works when
right.
when the FBI has just said that it really does.
So I see you on Twitter, jet setting all over the world and in different countries. How many different countries besides the U.S. are currently using the M-Vac?
I really should have that number right off the top of my head.
I mean, roughly, would you say 10 or?
Probably, yeah, 10 to 15.
Wow.
Yeah, it's more the number of units in each of those countries that is more of a factor. Like China, there's like 25 units in China now.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah, and there's multiple units in Thailand. There's we're spreading over the Asia, and there's a couple of units in Europe. But Europe's really slow. But we've got a couple of units in South Africa and Dubai. It's spreading pretty much in all regions of the world.
What does that conversation look like? Like when you go and you're doing a demonstration, is it just like, are they just absolutely blown away?
Well, of course, the M-Vac is the premier product in the world. And so everybody's blown away, right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. It's one of those where by the end of the demo, pretty much every investigator that I've and group that I've ever shown this product to, they look at each other and they basically go, "Dang, I wish we would have had this on X case." And the bigger the group, the more conversation at the end, where they pretty much just start ignoring me and they start talking with each other, going, "Man, we have got to use this on, the Smith case." And, they start talking about evidence that they have that, a bed sheet here and a jacket over here, some, women's underpants over here. It's just amazing where pretty much across the board, agencies they immediately start identifying cases where this system can be applied, where they think, "Man, we thought that case was dead, but now that we know that this thing exists, we've got another shot at it."
Well, let's talk about some of those real life cases. What are some of the biggest success stories of the M-Vac in investigating cases and solving them?
Well, the first really cool case that where the M-Vac was used that really blew everybody's mind was the Crystal Beslanowicz case. And that was actually right here in Utah. It was in 1995 was when the murder happened, December of 1995. And she was, they found her up in the mountains about 45 miles southeast of Salt Lake City. And she was, other than a pair of socks next to her, she was naked, had no clothing around her, other than, like I said, a pair of socks and a bunch of bloody rocks. And that was it. And so as an investigator, I'm sure that is everybody's surrealistic nightmare, because they're like, there's no physical evidence to go by. There's no witnesses. Some, poor rancher and his son that were out feeding the cows found her. And so that turned to be a cold case. It was a cold case for 18 years. And so all they had was these rocks, essentially. And but once they used the M-Vac on those rocks, and then we're talking granite, so these are really jagged, rough rocks. And once they used the M-Vac on them, they got 42 times more DNA than they needed to create a full profile.
That's incredible.
So, yeah, 21 nanograms of DNA material off of those rocks, and swabbing it yield nothing. So they loaded it up into CODIS and they nailed the guy, and they found him out in Florida. So that case was probably one of the first ones that really hit big as far as attention. Internationally, even, that case was awesome. Ironically, when the story broke, the whole focus was on getting DNA off of a cigarette butt that the suspect had just discarded. And everybody that's in DNA knows that if you have a fresh cigarette that somebody has just thrown into the trash or just discarded onto a sidewalk, that's not a big deal. You just grab a swab and go around where they put it in their mouth. And but yeah, so they totally missed that getting the DNA off of those rocks was a major deal. But whatever, we working with the press is always interesting, just trying to get them to understand, the intricacies of it. But, DNA is such a focus for everybody nowadays that they're starting to get it.
Well, let's look at the other side of the coin with another case. Tell me a little bit about the Chris Tapp case.
Okay. So there was a young girl that had just graduated high school named Angie Dodge. And this is up in Idaho Falls, Idaho, and which is a beautiful little town and very quiet, very safe. I don't think people even locked their doors around, that time. And I think this is late 90s, even 96 or 97, somewhere around there. And so she had moved into an apartment and had only been there just a few weeks, and didn't show up for work the next day. They went into her apartment and found that she had been stabbed, I think 16 times. It was a brutal murder. She had her throat had been slit, and Just a shame. But she was wearing a pair of sweats, and she always slept with a little teddy bear next to her bed. And so the teddy bear had obviously been used to muffle her, as I'm sure as she was screaming. And so they thought that she had been raped just based on where her sweatpants were. But again, just stabbed multiple times in a small town in Idaho. That's a rough one. And so the investigators went to work, and they eventually got focused on this kid named Chris Tapp. He was 18, I believe, at the time, and they just pounded on him, and they eventually got him to confess. And so they convicted him based on his confession that he was there, and he was convicted for murder and rape, and he was put in jail. So he had been serving, I think it was around his 13th year, is when Angie's mom, Carol Dodge, came into the picture. And Carol, she just couldn't let this go, because now they did find a semen stain on, I believe it was Angie's leg. And the crime lab in Idaho had tested that semen stain and gotten a profile, but it wasn't Chris Tapp's.
Well, how did they explain that?
That just means that there were, according to everything I've read, they just thought that there were multiple assailants. And so, the semen stain wasn't there. It didn't match Chris Tapp, but that doesn't mean that he didn't do it, right? And so, but Carol, she just couldn't let this go. She said, we have got to catch this guy that, whose DNA we do have. So somebody's still out there. And so she really started researching DNA. And in the course of her research, she found the M-Vac. And I remember this call like it was yesterday, because whenever victims' families call us, it's just like a lot of.
That's got to be a tough call.
Oh, it is. Yeah. It's always a rough one, and especially because as someone in industry, I'm not in law enforcement, and so I can't really talk to them,
right?
With any kind of a legal profession. I mean, that's not my place to do, and so, and I definitely never want to criticize any of the investigators or anybody for the job that they're doing. It's not. I just never know enough about what's going on. So yeah, you're walking that fine line in these conversations, but at the same time, I wanted to give her enough information about the M-Vac to give her an idea of what it would do. Well, she took that information and took it to the Idaho Falls PD and said, hey, we need to use this on Angie's clothes to see if Chris Tapp, if his DNA is on there, because according to what he had confessed to, he had held her arms down, I believe, and possibly even held her legs down. And, if you grab somebody's clothing and you're holding them down as they're being raped or stabbed, you're going to be depositing a lot of DNA.
Absolutely.
Just from the grip of the skin cells that's coming off your hands. But so they agreed, and they sent it down to West Jordan PD, and Francine Bardole, who's the senior CSI there. We call her the M-Vac queen, and she's had an M-Vac from almost I think 2013 is when she bought it, and she's worked hundreds of cases. So she went to work on that evidence, and everything that came back. They had DNA there, and it all matched that semen stain, and none of it matched Chris Tapp. And so eventually, after about 20 years, they decided, because they actually, okay, so let me backtrack a little bit. They tested it the first time, and then they didn't find Chris Tapp's DNA. So then they said, well, we basically just need to M-Vac the hell out of everything and say any kind of DNA that's on there, we need to find it.
Jared, is that a technical term, M-Vac the hell out of something? Is that a formal procedure?
Yeah, it's if you look it up in the dictionary, I think even with Wikipedia, it's in there.
So it's a noun and a verb.
Is that on any of the marketing brochures?
Yeah. Yeah. So, worst case scenario, just M-Vac the hell out of it. And then,
there you go. There's your commercial.
Yeah. I hope my mom doesn't hear this. She'll be mad. No, but they basically said we need to thoroughly M-Vac everything, including the teddy bear. Mm-hmm. That's why I know Francine even took all the stuffing out of the teddy bear.
Is that right?
So that everything would be laid flat, and that way she would be able to, get a really good seal with the M-Vac head on each piece of that teddy bear, and she M-Vac the sweats really well, and got lots of DNA. But none of it matched Chris Tapp. And so after 20 years of prison, they let him out.
Now, Jared, I saw on the news, you actually demonstrating the M-Vac to Chris Tapp in person when he was released from prison. What was that like?
Oh, that was a surreal moment. That was really wild. Yeah. So Greg Hampikian, who's at Boise State, in Boise, Idaho. I had met him. We were out in West Virginia filming a show, and I had met him, and we got talking because he's with the Innocence Project in Idaho, and he was involved with this whole, Chris Tapp's case and trying to get him released. And so I found out shortly after Chris had been released from prison that Greg was going to host him over there in Boise. And so Chris was going to travel there. So I said, hey, you know what? I'll throw an M-Vac in there, and I'll be a part of that. So I drove up to Boise, and I was able to, talk to the press there. But the most important thing was I was actually able to show Chris the system that helped him be released from prison. And it was really wild. It's, what an amazing guy. He, for being, literally having 20 years of his life stolen, humble and just grateful that he's out. It's just absolutely amazing.
Yeah, that must have been an awesome experience for you.
It really was. I had a couple of quiet moments with him where, we were just able to just kind of talk and, I just look at him and in talking with him and just listening to how grateful he was just that people would go to bat for him. Like Carol was instrumental in getting him out, and obviously Greg and the Innocence Project. And then, but his gratitude toward me, and I didn't do anything other than provide, we, as part of the company that provided a system that helped, help secure his release. But it's, I in putting myself in his place, I'm not sure I would have the same attitudes.
Yeah, I might be very bitter.
You would think, but no, he was, that's why I just look at him and I'm like, wow, you're an amazing dude.
Jared, I saw a very interesting post that you put up on LinkedIn. And you were talking about the possible use of the M-Vac in wildlife poaching investigations. How exactly would that work?
Well, when we were in the food industry, part of the things that we started experimenting on was actually sampling the hides of the beef, because as the cows come in, they're hosed down and they try to get as much of the fecal matter off of the hides as they can, because that's where E. coli 0157H7 comes from. And so if they can clean as much of that off of the cows before they go into the slaughter, then the safer you would think that the beef would be. So,
by the way, Dion and I are not going to have hamburgers today.
Or ever again.
Yeah, well, it's as long as it's cooked all the way through, then you're good. It's,
right. I'm burning it from here on out.
Yeah, I'm always amazed when people ask me, how do you want your hamburger cooked? you make sure that thing is cooked. All right. So, I'm trying not to bore you with all this, but it's one of those where we started sampling the hides of these cows to see how much fecal matter would actually be on there. So, based on that, we know that we can get whatever cellular material is there. And so in the poaching scenario, a lot, like take rhinos, for example, in South Africa. In fact, I was giving a presentation to the South Africa Police Services, and some of the rhino poaching guys were there. And when I had in my slide, I had animal poaching, or not animal poaching, but animal hides as one of the substrates that we can collect from. They said, you think this might work on rhinos? And so what'll happen is when a rhino is shot, most of the time it flops over on its side. Well, it's difficult to cut the horn off when that happens. And so they have to grab it by the ears and the horn and whatever, and try to push it erect. So then you can get at it. And, which is, but elephants, everything, it's all the same. They have to move it somehow to get at the horns.
And you're telling me the poachers don't wear latex gloves when they're doing this procedure?
Typically not. I think they're more worried about whoever the park security catch them.
No doubt. If
they do catch them, they shoot them right on the spot. There's no trial. Just get rid of them. And so so these guys, they're in and out, but a common place that they grab are the ears. Well, I don't know if you've ever touched a rhino hide, but it's like sandpaper. And especially if the animal's been dead for a couple of days. And so swabbing that's not going to do any good. So being able to use the M-Vac on it, it just makes perfect sense. So, yeah, I'm not sure if they're actually using it right now, but I know there's a couple systems in South Africa, and boy, if they ever do use it and catch some poachers with that would be a really cool story.
Yeah, that's a very, very interesting application. I was going to ask you, when you're out pitching the M-Vac to U.S. forensic labs, what are some of the myths and objections that you've had to overcome that these labs are putting forth?
Myths and objections. Well, it's interesting that, DNA, because it's so small, it never really reacts the same way, like how it's deposited. And, if 3 or 4 people grab your sleeve, for example, there's no way to tell who is going to be the last one that touched it. That's just not the way things work. But one of the myths that's out there is that if you just lightly swab that area, you'll get the last person that touched it. DNA is all going to be mixed in there. There's some kind of a ratio, and maybe the last person is going to deposit more than the first person, but you don't really know because everybody has what's called a shedder status. Like I may shed more DNA, my skin cells may come off more often than yours do. And so, a shedder may have touched him last week, but when I touch him, I leave, say, 10% of the DNA that's actually representative there, but the shedder that touched it last week was 80% of what's there. It's just kind of a weird ratio there. And so when you swab that, you're going to get the exact same ratio that the M-Vac does, but there's this myth that's out there. And so some people have actually said, well, I don't want to use the M-Vac on it because it's so aggressive. It gets down there deep into the fibers and it'll get DNA that I don't necessarily want. And I just kind of look at them and say, there's no science behind that. It doesn't make any sense to just lightly swab over the top because you're just going to get less DNA. And if it's a blood spatter or something that's a visible stain, then it doesn't matter what you use. You could use a spoon and you would get enough DNA to create a profile. But if you don't, especially in a touch DNA scenario, if you don't get down and get aggressive to where you believe the DNA is deposited, then far too often it just doesn't meet the thresholds. And then the entire process, you have to go through it again because you didn't get enough to actually call the alleles. And I'm sure, Mehul, you understand that better than anybody. It's like there's a threshold that anything below that, the lab legally can't make a distinction on. And so getting more DNA will push those alleles higher and over the threshold.
Sure.
And then you have actionable data. And that's what it's all about.
So what are some other reasons that a lab would say, well, Jared, you're a nice guy, but we're just not interested in the M-Vac? Like, why wouldn't you want this?
I've had other labs say, well, we're a high throughput lab and we just don't have time for it. And that's one that always makes me scratch my head as well. In fact, the LA area, both LAPD and LA County Sheriff, that's some of their lab folks. That's their response, is we just don't have time to validate it. We don't have time to interject it in here. And I think now that the FBI data is out, I think those excuses are going to go to the wayside.
That's going to change a lot of minds.
I would think, it's like I said, it's the FBI. You can't really, any kind of data related question is automatically gone. But
you're never going to get them to jump up and down.
I don't think so. They just have different objectives. Their objective is to make sure that everything's done according to the process that's set up. Was everything sterile? Was the process followed? The correct amount of chemicals put in. All that kind of stuff. That's they're an objective entity, and so the result isn't necessarily as important as the process. Whereas on the investigative side, the result is everything.
Well, I'm going to switch gears on you a little bit. And you opened the door on my question, and you mentioned that when you were in Idaho, you were filming. And I want to talk about a little bit about M-Vac's celebrity status. And I've seen it pop up on various TV shows, and I remember seeing the M-Vac on CSI a few years back. What other scripted network TV shows have featured the M-Vac?
Well, we were just on Discovery ID. They actually highlighted the Crystal Bislanowicz case, and we're up there in Wasatch County filming even the detectives and everybody that helped break that case. So that was the latest one.
That was ID's Murder Decoded?
Yeah.
And you were on camera.
I was, yeah.
How did that come about, and what was it like?
You know what? I don't really know how a lot of these things come about.
Do you have an agent? Are you not sharing things with us?
Yeah.
Are you represented by CAA?
I wish. I might actually make some money when I do this, but they. I think just having the latest and greatest in forensics tools is probably one of the reasons. But just the fact that the M-Vac was such an integral part of that case. In fact, the sheriff actually said, if it wasn't for the M-Vac, we would have never solved that case. So, when it's such a central player, then I think that's when the show decides on that particular case. They said, well, we got to include the M-Vac. So I think by default, that's, we're a small company. So by default, I end up there. But I was also there was a case called the Smiley Face Killers. And the victim's name, I believe, was Lou Coleman. Not sure what episode that was, but he was an accidental drowning. They thought there might have been some foul play. So the M-Vac was on that show.
How did you enjoy being on camera?
It's just, I try to ignore the cameras. But yeah, I'm definitely not an actor.
Is in Utah, are you have any autograph hounds are coming up and getting you to ask for autographs, sign an M-Vac or something?
And don't be humble.
Yeah, right. Let's see. Next time somebody brings their M-Vac around, I can start signing some of those, and yeah, we'll keep them in the storehouse, and I'm sure the demand will be amazing for that. No, I don't mind it. It's one of those where I'm getting a little more used to it. I'm doing enough of these interviews, and even I think we've been on more news channels than we have TV shows, but so it's all kind of the same.
How was one of the ones I found interesting, your participation in history's Hunt for the Zodiac Killer?
Well, I actually wasn't involved in that at all. In fact, I found out about it later, but the M-Vac was. Now, there's a good friend of ours down in the San Diego area. Her name's Susanna Ryan, and she's part of Ryan Forensics and Pure Gold Forensics. And but she's also part of the Cold Case Society, the ASOC, and that's where I originally met her. And so they had an M-Vac down there, and Ken Maines, who was the lead guy, along with Sal. I can't remember his last name, but the two,
Barbera, I believe. Yeah,
you're right. And so those two were the primary guys. Well, Ken is the president of ASOC, and so he knew that that Susanna had an M-Vac down there, and once they found that those pair of pants from the Sherry Jo Bates murder, then they thought, you know what, we got to M-Vac these things, and so that's how the M-Vac ended up on that show.
Is that the same scenario for Killing Fields on Discovery?
I'm drawing a blank on that one.
I think it was the Isle of, was it called Isle of Right case?
Oh, yeah. Okay. I'm sorry. Holy cow. You know what? That one, the M-Vac that they used was down at DNA Labs in Florida. And so, I wasn't involved with that one either. No, the M-Vac has just decided to sign their own contract and is out breaking things open.
It's like a band. It's the lead singer, and it's left you behind.
Yeah, the system's gone rogue on us, and it's which I don't really care. I don't need to be on camera, but no, the more the M-Vac's on the camera, I love it. So.
Well, Jared, there's no doubt now that the M-Vac is in the mainstream of DNA collection techniques. What does the future hold for the M-Vac in this space? And do you have any plans for newer models of the M-Vac?
It's interesting. We've put out some surveys to some of our customers and asking, what if there were any improvements that you wish you could have, what would they be? And especially about, the what we call the support equipment case. That's that houses the vacuum and all of the equipment. And they said, nope, don't change it. The only thing they wanted to find was maybe like a smaller filter size, because the amount of filter material doesn't fit exactly into, the same volume like what a swab does. So maybe the sample could be a little more concentrated, but as far as the actual M-Vac and the equipment of it, the majority of them came back and said, don't you dare change it.
That actually brings me a question for our listeners who aren't familiar with the M-Vac. Give us a visual about how big it is.
Well, the support equipment case, which is, again, the durable item, the rest of it are supplies that are consumables. But the durable item is... it weighs about 65 pounds. Because just the vacuum alone weighs about 30 pounds. But it's about the size of a 26-inch suitcase, maybe, that you would check in. And so it's probably about 12 inches deep and, 18 to 20 inches wide, and then about 25 inches tall. So it's not huge, but it's not the most compact piece of equipment. But
No, that's a good visual to give us about the size of a carrier.
And on that, there's a pressurization chamber that pressurizes a bag of solution. That we got that idea from an IV bag in the hospital, and then it's got some connections and things where you plug in the tubing.
Oh, that's great. Is there anything else you'd like to mention about the M-Vac that we didn't cover?
I don't know. Other than the only change that we have done in the recent years is we have what's called a vented M-Vac, and that's the one that they use for skin sampling and sampling like even small. You could even sample an envelope or something like that if you're trying to get DNA off of it. So. But other than that, we haven't had to change anything, even from switching from the food industry over to the forensics, which was really unfortunate because had we had to do any kind of major changes, I'm not sure we would have survived. So I think that was all part of the plan.
Yeah, that's good. I've got a kind of a rogue question. Is there a case out there, a cold case that you've seen in the media that you've actually were active and wanted to be involved?
Where we weren't involved, and I wish we were. Yeah,
that something you saw in the media, and there was a high-profile case, and you're just like, hey, we can help with this. Oh, you've been proactive in trying to reach out to the department involved.
Well, there's a couple actually. When the Boston bombing happened, I immediately called Boston PD and said, hey, if you want DNA off of those backpacks, the M-Vac's the way to do it. Of course they didn't need it, but had that case lingered on, even after an explosion, I'm totally confident that the M-Vac could have got DNA off those backpacks. And probably the other one that I think the M-Vac could have really made a difference was maybe the Casey Anthony case. Or Kaylee Anthony, I guess, was a little girl that was murdered down there, or whatever, murdered. I think we could have potentially got DNA off of the duct tape that was around her,
right?
As well as, had she been transported in the trunk, I think we could have M-Vac'd that trunk and
M-Vac the hell out of it.
Yeah, we would have M-Vac'd the hell out of that trunk. I tell you that.
That could have been an absolute game changer.
I think so. I really do. It's one of those. There's so many other cases out there. The McStay case. Are you guys familiar with that one?
Yeah, I've seen it in the news recently.
Yeah, the M-Vac was used on that one, and in fact, Susanna Ryan was the operator of the M-Vac, and she sampled the clothing that had been buried for 3 years, and she got 3 CODIS eligible profiles off of that clothing.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Wow.
Yeah, that's been buried for 3 years. That blew my mind. I was like, holy cow, but DNA is pretty durable stuff. It's especially if you can imagine if clothing is folded over on itself, and if there's any DNA trapped in there, it's going to protect it from the elements. And that's a pretty arid place down there. So it doesn't completely surprise me that the DNA had survived that long. But
wow, Jared, it's always a pleasure speaking to you and following the incredible success of the M-Vac.
Well, I appreciate it. Yeah, it's it's moving slower than what we'd like, but better than not moving at all.
Well, I say let's get one of those suckers in every crime lab. And Jared, once again, thanks for your time today.
Really appreciate it. It was really interesting.
Oh, my pleasure. Absolutely, guys.
So, Mehul, what are your initial thoughts on Jared's interview?
Well, I was listening carefully when he was talking about sampling that rock next to the river and how it was a jagged surface and a difficult surface. And I was thinking when I was in a lab recently, and in this case, they were swabbing bricks for touch DNA to see who might have handled that brick and used it as a weapon. And as the analyst was taking the swab, which is pretty much like a Q-tip, they're running it back and forth on this brick, and after 5-6 times, that swab is just starting to shred, making it useless for collecting DNA. And I just think the M-Vac would have worked wonderfully on that brick sample. Another thing that came to mind in a few of my cases are airbags. So, a lot of times you look at a deployed airbag in an accident and there's blood all over it. Okay, fine, that's a no-brainer. But sometimes there's no visible stains. So the crime lab will swab the front surface of that airbag, and what I'm seeing quite often is that they get little or no DNA. Well, how can that be, right? Because if an airbag deployed and there was a passenger, it had to hit that person in the face, and there had to be some DNA transfer. So by taking the M-Vac, you can cover every inch of that airbag, and you can really suck out every piece of DNA out of the crevices. So I look forward to seeing the M-Vac used on some of my current cases.
Jared talked about some of the barriers to entry for forensic labs for the market for M-Vac. Is cost one of them?
I really don't think so. The initial purchase price of the unit is about $44,000, and then it costs about $90 per sample that you collect with the M-Vac.
So in the DNA universe, is that a lot of money?
It really isn't. Crime labs have very expensive toys. You've got sophisticated robotics, you've got expensive software, and everything you do is just very expensive. So I don't think that the M-Vac should create sticker shock. But, you think about all of the existing expensive machinery you have in a crime lab, and you want that to get the best possible results. So by getting an M-Vac, you're getting more DNA to put into that system, and you have a better chance of getting good results with all of the equipment you've invested in already. And then I think about overall manpower in the investigation. So in a case, particularly a cold case, there's a lot of man hours in an investigation, particularly if this is over the course of a number of years. So if you use the M-Vac, regardless of the startup costs, and you very quickly get a DNA result that solves the case, you've now shortcut all of that investigation and manpower. So you just have to look at it in terms of overall ROI, and you may well be saving money.
Yeah, when you put it like that, it kind of puts you in a, why wouldn't you make this purchase, right?
Big picture thinking.
You know what else I found really interesting was the evolution of the M-Vac. Jared started out with his father doing food safety, and then from there moved to solving cold cases, and then to exonerations, and even landing in TV shows like CSI. I think that whole journey is really amazing to me.
So we hope you enjoyed our presentation of the M-Vac technology in this episode. You can learn more at the official M-Vac website, which is m-vac.com, and at Jared's blog at mvacblog.com. And finally, follow Jared and his little sidekick, the M-Vac, on Twitter at MVACSys. That's MVACSYS.
And don't forget to check out our Instagram page, username Crime Redefined. We're always posting content. And thanks again for listening.
Thank you for listening to the Crime Redefined podcast. Like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter at Crime Redefined. Please send us your comments and questions and join us for the next episode.